moderator.
You can go ahead. You can go ahead.
Mute this. Fantastic. So hello and welcome to this IAU Symposium on Public Engagement Training. My name's Jon Chase and I'll be moderating this session. Now, the relationship with humans and astronomy goes back millennia, and to many, it can be regarded as the oldest science. It has always been extremely important to humans, and so its global prevalence and appeal is no surprise. However, people have different relationships with astronomy, and indeed the astronomers who conduct it. So building bridges between the world of astronomy and the wider public is vital to ensuring the relationship between the two is positive and beneficial to both. Now, this is especially relevant nowadays, where public funding for astronomy makes the public support of astronomy even more important. This factor means that the continuation of astronomy research is at least partly reliant on the international astronomical community's ability to communicate the importance of astronomy to the public. In this way, training in public engagement can be seen as a very valuable thing for astronomers to have. So with that in mind, the goal of this event is to share ideas about public engagement training from the perspective of practitioners, researchers, and future leaders in our community. So today we will hear from Brooke Smith from the Cavali Foundation, commenting on the Cavali IAU partnership and the importance of public engagement. We'll also hear from Ewine van Dishoeck from Leiden University, who will talk about IAU's perspective on public engagement. And also John Besley from Michigan State University, who will be sharing valuable insights about public engagement training, trust and science communication. Fatoumata Kébé and Maria Drostovska, who will be looking towards the future of public engagement training for astronomers. And finally, we'll hear from Kelly Blumenthal from the IAU, who will be reflecting on her public engagement training experiences, the legacy of the public engagement training program, and the OAO's role in public engagement training. Now, myself, I'm Jon Chase. I'll be your moderator, as I said before. My background is in science communication, and I've been doing it for about 14 years now. Currently, I'm at Leiden University, working in the Astronomy and Society group, and also the Science Communication and Society group, and working on a project called Globalscape, which aims to get a better view of the experiences and perceptions of science communication professionals across the globe. And especially we'll be doing a year-long diary study that you can find out more about if you'd like by just typing in Globalscape on Google or Globalscape EU. So my particular role for Globalscape is to develop some training materials, and we'll be looking at training for science communication professionals. And I've worked a lot with Kelly in the past few months, looking at the crossovers between our project. So it's my pleasure to be able to moderate this event. So first up, we will have an amazing speaker and a great representative from Cavali. Now, she won't be here in person, but we do have a pre-recorded video from her. So let me say who her name is, and it's Brooke Smith. Now, Brooke Smith is the Director of Public Engagement with Science at the Cavali Foundation, where she works to strengthen science's relationship with society. Brooke is passionate about scientists engaging with various publics and supporting those who enable scientists to communicate and engage effectively. At the Cavali Foundation, Brooke leads programs to engage the public in ethical considerations born from scientific discovery, better understand the relationship between basic science and the public, build the field of public engagement with science, and support engagement efforts of Cavali's partners. Her expertise and experiences are rooted in science, science communication, public engagement of science, public policy, science journalism, and organizational leadership and development. So like I said, unfortunately, Brooke cannot be with us live right now, but she has kindly provided us with this recording of her contribution. So it's over to Brooke Smith.
Okay, hi everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. It's nice to be here with you virtually. I'm sorry I'm not here with you in person. I'm Brooke Smith, the Director of Public Engagement with the Cavali Foundation, and I'm really happy to be here giving some opening remarks to your great sessions here today. I can't be with you there in person. However, I put my Twitter handle up here, and if you want to reach out and talk about anything that I share in my opening remarks, I'd be happy to discuss it with you on Twitter, or we can exchange contact information. I just wanted to provide a few opening remarks and context about the Cavali Foundation, why we care about public engagement with science, what we're seeing as challenges and opportunities in public engagement, and why this partnership with the IAU is important to us, and why the work you're doing is relevant to some of the things we're seeing here at the Cavali Foundation. So really briefly, the mission of the Cavali Foundation is advancing science for the benefit of humanity. This is our founder, Fred Cavali, who is famous for saying, the future will be more spectacular than we can ever imagine. And I know that this is something that resonates with us here at the Foundation in terms of supporting very forward-thinking, curiosity-driven discovery research. Much of the research and the researchers that you work with and connect with and the work that you do, of course, is in this spirit. At the Foundation, we specifically fund efforts in astrophysics, obviously, as well as nanoscience, neuroscience, and theoretical physics. We consider ourselves champions for scientific research, specifically basic science and basic scientific research. The Cavali Foundation has been a longtime partner with the IAU on various initiatives that bring together thinking about new scientific directions or the current state of the science in astronomy and astrophysics. But we've been really happy to be connected on the public engagement front. And in fact, part of our mission in thinking about science to benefit humanity is to ensure that we're strengthening the relationship between science and society. For those of you who have known the Cavali Foundation for some time, we just celebrated our 20th anniversary. You're surely familiar with our scientific research funding and work. Our work in strengthening the relationship between science and society is something that Fred Cavali, our founder, has always cared about. But it wasn't until about 3 or 4 years ago that we really built a dedicated program and strategy to thinking about this. And that's when I had the privilege of joining the foundation at that time, about 4 years ago, to help start this program. And I just wanted to share a few things that we've been thinking about in terms of engaging the public with science and some things that we've been learning about. I wanted to point you to 2 initiatives specifically that we've been involved in for the past 4 years. First of all, about 4 years ago, one of the first things we did is we tried to better understand how scientists and professionals who are communicating science or engaging the public in science, how their work is going, and how can we be sure that when there is work to communicate or engage science, that it's done well and it's done sustainably. With that in mind, we actually spent about 1.5 years convening workshops and commissioning some landscape papers to better understand what are the opportunities and challenges for scientists and professionals specifically in their work to connect science to the public. I put up here a website and I'll ask the organizers to stick it into either your chat or whatever your meeting platform is so you can access this as well. But this website takes you to a summary of all of the landscape papers and the workshop discussions that we held over that 1.5 years if you're interested in digging into the details. And I'm going to share some of those highlights in a minute. We also at the Foundation have been involved in a new partnership with the Department of Energy called SciPep, Science Public Engagement Partnership. For those of you in the US, you'll know the Department of Energy. For those of you outside of the US, the Department of Energy is the largest federal funder here in the United States of basic science research. And so the Cavali Foundation and the Department of Energy have been partnering over the past 1.5 years or so to better understand the landscape of science engagement and communication, specifically as it relates to basic science. Really asking the question, is there anything special about basic science that's different than applied science that we should be aware of when we're designing our communication and engagement efforts? So scipep.org is the website there, and we actually just released what we call a prospectus, which is a summary of what we've learned the past year about what we know about the relationship between the public and basic science, and what questions we should still ask to better understand that relationship. So these are two efforts that really inform our thinking of where our opportunities, where might the field be going, what might be things we need to pay attention to. So I encourage you to go look at them if you're interested. And I'm just going to talk for a few minutes about just the high level take homes that we've had the past couple of years about what the challenges and opportunities are, because I know that they are very relevant to the conversations that you'll be having today, and really motivated Cavali and the IAU in connecting in the first place to think about how can we ensure that we're effective and sustainable in our engagement and communication of basic science, of astronomy, of astrophysics. So at a very high level, here are some of the challenges that we've uncovered. For those of you who have worked in communicating and engaging publics in science for any period of time, some of these challenges will feel very familiar to you. You've probably talked about them at various conferences or discussions with your colleagues. Our work in having discussions with leaders and doing these white papers has been really helpful in identifying and elevating these as some of the priority challenges that we should be considering as we move forward as a field in engagement with the public. So first of all is there needs to be more work to connect to the scholarship of public engagement and science communication with the practice. That in fact, there's a large body of social science that helps us understand the relationship between the public and science, provides insights into how we might be engaging the public on various issues or communicating and talking about the science. But that social science is often yet not accessed in our practice, and something that we should be paying attention to. We also noticed, though, in our work with the DOE, that when we dig into the scholarship about basic science communication and engagement specifically, we see that there's not much specific to basic science. I know that there is a really great and growing body of work specifically about communicating astronomy, and the work that you're doing to contribute to that body of scholarship is so important. When we look across all basic science compared to applied science, the scholarship around what we understand about communication and engagement is quite thin. So this is an area that as we're doing more communication and engagement in any of our fields, just thinking about whether or not there's opportunities to partner with social scientists and to publish about it so that we can learn from it and have more of a stronger grounding in theory and practice in the work that we do. We've also identified that ensuring that science communication is diverse and inclusive is really important. When we look at who's communicating science, who they're communicating it to, and what they're communicating about, oftentimes it's not as diverse and inclusive as the publics that exist on our planet or in any one of our individual countries. And in fact, this is something that in our SciPep conversations, we've questioned whether or not these issues are perhaps stronger in the basic sciences, that there might be more challenges in thinking through who's communicating the science and who we're communicating with when we're working in the basic science specifically. We've identified this need for scientists to not just feel compelled to lecture and talk about their work, but to find ways to really listen and engage in dialogue with various publics. And I know that that's something that the IAU has been thinking deeply about and been developing deeper trainings about, which is really exciting. We know that scientists and even the professionals who are doing this work are often not recognized or incentivized to do it. So it's not built into their jobs. It's done off the side of their desk. I was really excited to see the new Education Outreach and Engagement Awards that were announced from the IAU recently. And certainly that is a great way for the disciplinary societies or institutions to honor this work that's being done and know that you're on the forefront of that as well. And just generally the need for infrastructure. Do we have the resources, the capacity, the connections to do all of this work? How are we building that? How are we all staying connected? So these are challenges that we've really identified in communicating and engaging people in science that I know that you at the IAU are really thinking about and thinking about ways to pioneer to move these forward and be more effective in these spaces. We also identified through all of our work a number of bright spots, and we certainly see this in your community, an enormous willingness from scientists, especially early career scientists, to do this work. And so capitalizing on that energy and giving them the resources and tools that you all need is really important. We see more and more data and scholarship on people's relationship with science and encourage you all to continue to contribute to that body of knowledge. We see growing scholarship about science of science communication and engagement, and certainly growing scholarship around your field specifically. We're seeing a lot more connections and programs in this area, more conferences, more discussions, more people connecting with each other amongst conferences. The conversations that you'll all have today, I know many of your leaders are connected to other folks thinking about engagement to make sure they're sharing and learning about that, which is great. And more than anything, we're seeing a lot more passion and energy from people who really want to do this work and connect with people in science. We've certainly seen that, astronomy has so many wonderful opportunities around this idea of passion because of the interest and curiosity that your work sparks. And so it's so exciting to see where your field's moving in this space. So with that, I just wanted to, I'll flip back one more time. So we've got these challenges that you can look at. We've got these bright spots. And as you move forward in your conversations over the next day or so, just keeping these in mind, and just wanted to acknowledge that as we've been partnering with the IAU on a number of different fronts, that our recognition that these are challenges and these are opportunities that we should think critically about how can we address and how can we capitalize on them has been a great motivator for the partnership with the Cavali Foundation and the work that you're doing and the conversations that you'll be having. So with that, again, I encourage you to reach out to my Twitter handle, and I'll look forward to connecting with you all soon and hearing about the great conversations that you're having. And thank you. Thanks for your great work and your passion and your energy around this.
Fantastic. And we'd like to say a huge thank you for Brooke sending that across. That was absolutely amazing. And again, if you have any questions for any of our speakers, please do put it in the YouTube messages, and we can see anything that's in the chat there. We've also put in Brooke's Twitter handle if you'd like to check it out. We'll also throw in a few more links from the talk she just gave. So it's really wonderful to see so many people here today and from all corners of the world. So like just looking through the list now, I've seen people from Dominican Republic, from Vienna, from Indonesia, Jakarta, Oxford in the UK. You guys are from everywhere. So folks, thank you so much for being here again. And we hope you gained as much value from this as we've seen all the speakers that are intended to contribute to it, because there's so much value that can be had from it. Okay, so next up, we have a lady that I saw speak once and I was absolutely astounded. I thought it was absolutely amazing. She's such a great communicator. Her name is Ewine van Dishoeck, and she is Professor of Molecular Astrophysics at Leiden University in the Netherlands. The work of her group innovatively unites the world of chemistry with that of physics and astronomy with major new telescopes. She has been fortunate to receive many awards, including the 2018 Cavali Prize for Astrophysics, as well as membership of several academies. From 2018 to 2021, Avina served as the president of the International Astronomical Union, or shortened as the IAU, as many of you know. So it is my absolute pleasure to invite Avina to come and take the spotlight. Thank you, Avina.
Avina, I'm so sorry. I think you may be muted.
Sorry, I thought I had a minute. Hi, thank you, Jon, for this introduction. Thank you very much. It's really my pleasure to be here today. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I hope you are doing well. It's my pleasure to share with you some thoughts on public engagement, and I'm doing this both as past president of the IAU, but also as an active researcher and somebody who quite often is asked to speak on various public engagement occasions, and I'll try to sort of share some of my experiences with you. So first of all, I want to thank actually Brooke for her very nice presentation and also for enabling this partnership, especially on this research of public engagement. This was something that we started about 2 years ago when we started talking with the IAU. And then late 2020, that is actually when we managed to come to an agreement on this. And as part of that agreement, we are delighted to have this public engagement program included in there. And this is something, of course, that we are doing as the IAU together with Cavali, and with the IAU here, I mean also especially the Office of Astronomy Outreach under the leadership of Lina, Canas, but also the IAU Commission C2, and that is a very important one. And then we have related to all of this our Office of Astronomy Education and our Office of Astronomy for Development. Both of those are, of course, in some ways also involved in public engagement, but it's primarily through the OAO. And so I want to acknowledge here also Kelly. Kelly, of course, is the person who carried out this program under the Cavali Foundation funding. Very wonderful to have you here. You started in the middle of a pandemic, and we thought we would be out of that pandemic during your program, but it actually stayed for the full period. And so we really acknowledge the wonderful work that you've been doing under these very difficult circumstances. And I also want to acknowledge behind the scenes, Pedro Russo from the Astronomy and Society group in Leiden, and Lina Canas, of course, as the director of the OAO. There's also a steering committee involved for this particular program, and I want to acknowledge here Catherine Hymans, also the Astronomer Royal now of Scotland, John Besley, that you will hear later, and Shazreen Mohammed, who basically engaged with Kelly every few months and monitored her progress and gave advice on various of the work that she has been doing and highlighting that. Okay, good. Well, what is actually public engagement? What do we mean with that? Now, in this context, and I'm sure that John will talk about this in much more detail, but there's really a myriad of different ways in which we can bring our research and also the benefits and the activities that we're doing in higher education to the public and to society. And I think this is the key point. By definition, this is a two-way street. This is something that Brooke actually also stressed. It's not just us lecturing to the public. That's not the way it works. It's basically we really have to interact with them. We have to listen with them. We have to build trust with them. And only then we can get the mutual benefits. And I want to stress here the word also mutual. It's not just a benefit for the public and society that we are involving them in the outcomes of our research and the benefits that of the higher education. But it's also for us as scientists. It's very motivational, and it also helps us all to develop new skills. So in that sense, it's also very important. In fact, you can have all kinds of definitions, but I always like these wise words from the past from Benjamin Franklin, which says, and this really stresses the importance of the word engagement. Tell me and I forget, teach me and I may remember, involve me and I learn. And I think that is something very important to keep in mind. That's involvement really when you're talking with them. Now, why are we doing public engagement in astronomy? Well, first of all, and this is also the outreach part, the public interest is just simply huge. And you just have to think about this image when it came out in 2019, the chef first image of the shadow of a black hole, it was basically viewed by 4.5 billion people across the globe. And that shows also that, yes, basic science can be very exciting to the public. People just wanted to know, they wanted to share this picture. Very good example. But you have other, much closer to home, as say the moonlander, year of the Chinese on the far side of the moon, also large amount of public attention. And then just most recently, the launch of the James Webb Space Telescope. Again, many people across the globe that were watching this, the whole unfolding of the story of the telescope in space, and that is still ongoing now, the commissioning, trying to make from 18 images, 1 image of the telescope. Just again, a story that really engages millions, if not billions of people across the globe. And these are words actually from Dame Anne Glover, that she spoke at the IAU 100 Years Symposium in April 2019, as somebody who is definitely not an astronomer, but basically saying how much astronomy, how much science can actually liberate people. And that's a very important reason for basically doing science communication. Of course, education is a very important reason for doing this, and especially in astronomy, when we want to sort of be a gateway for attracting young children to STEM. We want to trigger curiosity in them, and astronomy is again uniquely inspirational for this. Children are more excited by black holes than they are by, say, benzene molecules. And so it's not to get them into astronomy, but it's basically to get them into the sciences. Of course, transfer of technologies is a whole other area, methods, resources that we do that society can benefit from there. And there are many examples there as well. Also, it is our responsibility. I mean, we have uniquely, as scientists, we have the responsibility, accountability also to communicate our research to society. It's part also of the transparency of doing research that we have to do this. And it's a fact of saying that anybody who gets a degree at Leiden University is being reminded to never forget this responsibility that we have as scientists to science and society. And then finally also funding, site selection, those are important reasons for also doing outreach and public engagement. But for me, one of the most important aspects is also this inspiration, this perspective that we can bring to the general public. Okay, what is my own experience? Well, over my career, I've given many outreach and public talks to various audiences in my home country, the Netherlands, but also beyond, across the globe. And that is all kinds of different audiences: amateur astronomers, retired engineers, school children, policymakers, Rotaries, general public, etc. And in every case, you have to think, who is my audience? What is the level that I'm going to talk to them? That how can I basically connect with them? I always try to put myself in their shoes and say, what do they know as background, and how can I connect basically to one of their experiences. I think one of my most exciting experience recently was when I was actually in Nigeria in 2019, and I was speaking to a group of 300 school children, sort of elementary school children. And it was just the enthusiasm and the passion that these children had, and just non-stop questions, 1 hour long. It was a fantastic experience to do that. And so I know many of you here on the line have had similar experiences, and keep doing that, keep that passion and transmitting that, especially to the younger generation. So then as a scientist, I became IAU president, and that was sort of a whole new level of experiences, especially since we had the 100-year celebrations and overseeing that. And there I learned really a huge amount of there on how to do sort of these large events. I've certainly not had any formal trainings. I've learned from observing others, which is also a good way, especially successful ones. And then also working with communication experts. They can be very useful in giving you feedback. Professionals that say, oh, but you need to really present it in a different way. The IAU offices have taught me a lot. And of course, this project, through the work with Kelly, has also given me new insights. And I hope that it will also give all of you here online new insights. So where do we start? Well, it also always starts with a good story. That is very important. Again, you need to think actually of what you want to tell from the beginning. Have a good story. Good material is also very important. Good graphics. Have a good graphic artist that you can work with. Good relations. That you need to build up, trust that you need to build up, and then knowing indeed your audiences. And so, of course, we are very fortunate that in astronomy we have all these beautiful pictures and that we can relate to the general public quite easily, because the viewing of the night sky is actually available to all of us. We are experiencing it about half of our time, even though we cannot always see the dark skies, but in principle everything is available everywhere in the world. And so when you start to ask these big questions like where do we come from, or what is our place in the universe, you can immediately point to something like the Milky Way that you see over here and say, well, our solar system was also once formed in a dark cloud here in between the stars. And you can relate to questions such as, how were we formed? We being our solar system some 4.5 billion years ago. And so we have some very exciting missions there in our own solar system that again engage a large fraction of the public. The Japanese Hayabusa 2 mission, the Osiris-Rex, lots of people interested in sort of what is coming out of traveling to an asteroid and picking up material and bringing it back home. And then again, that's a continuing story that is still unfolding. And then a few years ago, we had the Rosetta landing on a comet. And that was, of course, again, a very big public engagement event where people, both from the technological side, how do you land on a comet that is also tumbling in space? That was the whole technological aspect, but then also the scientific aspect is in studying sort of some of the most primitive material out of which our solar system has been made. Iconic images are very important. We saw already this image of the black hole. That became an iconic image. This is another iconic image from ALMA of the planet-forming disk. And here I really want to acknowledge the wonderful work that is being done by NASA, by ESA, by ESO, by JAXA and EOJ across the world, all of the observatories that are making these wonderful animations that you can then use sort of in public talks and also even in scientific talks. As you see over here, that of a planet that is actually carving a gap here in a disk and causing this kind of structure that we actually see in a disk. So basically where we are seeing this planet formation in action. And the fact that we as a community are making all of this material publicly available is also fantastic. That's still not common in many other sciences, but it's something that we are really leading the way and that we absolutely should keep doing this. I mentioned already the importance of graphic artists, cartoons. A cartoonist can help a lot as well. You don't need to be a professional for this. This is basically a postdoc here of the Rosetta team that made this nice cartoon, but it's again something that makes a smile on somebody when you are giving a public talk. And think about those kind of examples, saying basically Rosetta has a very good nose. It's a very nice example here. Also the cartoons for kids that were made with Rosetta was a wonderful example of actually relating this to the younger generation. So from these examples, we've seen already that public engagement happens at many, many different levels. Outreach, events that we have, education, the mobile planetarium. I will say a little bit more about it, teacher training, inclusiveness, of course, both on the audio and visually handicapped, where the IAU has made huge efforts to reach also them. But then also at the level of young scientists, learning how to write your first press release, how to give an elevator pitch. That's a different kind of training, but that is also very important. You know, working with the science museum, working with the planetaria. They have wonderful, you know, locations to do events, to sort of relate your story with, say, the planetarium. Just recently, in the context of Webb, you can have a wonderful planetarium show where you give a talk about, say, what Webb is going to do, what Webb is, how it is unfolding, and then you can ask, you know, in the mobile planet, not in the, just even a regular planetarium, you can just say, now let's go and travel to Webb. And you can just have the audience basically being immersed in this and traveling out to where Webb is located at L2. So there are all kinds of opportunities that we need to develop and further develop and grab in this way. Our amateur astronomers are wonderful. There are so many more amateur astronomers than there are professional astronomers, and they are again a gateway to the general public, and they are very good at sort of telling the stories also to the general public. And something else that is upcoming now is astrotourism. I'll say a few words more about that. Citizen science is yet another way. Aspect that astronomy sort of pioneered and has now been taken over by many other sciences, and also the co-creation of them. But I think one of the things that I've learned, certainly in my experience, is really the importance of us as professional scientists working with the professional science communicators, because we can learn so much from each other. So here are just some of the examples that I was running by, like you know, events that you can that start somewhere in the world, say Astronomy on Tap. I think it's started in New York, but then it's a program that you can actually quite easily roll out across the world. And I think that's the success of, say, Astronomy on Tap, Science and Cocktails, Nerd Nights. These are some of these very successful events that work very well in reaching sort of a very diverse audience. Music festivals, you reach yet another part of the society. I'm thinking here especially of Starmoose. That's hopefully next year, not 2021, but 2022 will happen in Armenia. Again, there are many examples of this, but it's reaching out to a different part of society. I think that's the trap that we should not fall into, is that we always already sort of preach to the converted, but that we really try to always reach new audiences, especially audiences that are not aware of science, and that really sort of can benefit from the inspiration that comes from it. One yet other example is my own hobby, which is astronomy and art, which of course, as a Dutch person with Vincent van Gogh and his Starry Night, is maybe not so surprising, but here you see the Big Dipper here over the Seine. But you see this actually in many other cultures as well. Wherever I go in the world, I see that the Starry Night has provided an inspiration to the people there, not just scientists, but really artists, all kinds of different parts of society. And of course, here is one of my favorite ones in Australia, and the Aboriginals having the wonderful night sky and the beautiful southern hemisphere actually above them. And their sort of these dreamings, especially the Milky Way dreaming, are an integral part of their cosmology. So there are examples really from across the world. So one of my interesting experiences was to actually co-curate a exhibition on this in the Boerhaven Museum in Leiden in 2019-2020. And there I saw sort of all of the aspects of bringing such a exhibition together. Of course, the content is important, and I can provide content, and I can provide also some suggestions for art. But then you need other experts that know both about the art and the history of the historical objects. That was very important to work with somebody who knew that part. But then you work with other people who do then the design of the exhibition, and then subsequently the communication, and especially the design. We were struggling a lot. How do you do this? We were thinking about historically going from very ancient to more modern. And then it really took somebody who came from completely the outside to say, no, you need to do this in a completely different way that, the public can easily understand. Go from close by to far away. Go from the moon to the sun, to the solar system, to stars and galaxies. And once, we had that concept, then sort of the whole exhibition came together. But it really took somebody from completely other area and expertise to make that conclusion. So that's sort of my lesson there, is that it's really a team effort, that you need all these expertises to bring it together. Now back to the IAU, and it's a sort of big event. Of course, we had the International Year of Astronomy in 2009, which was really a pioneering worldwide effort in astronomy outreach and public engagement. And then 10 years later, we had IAU 100-year celebrations. And all of these brought really tens, if not 100 millions people across the world together and engaged them in various activities. So what are the lessons from that? Well, again, it first needs to start with plan, and you need to start well in advance with that, both with the International Year in 2009 and in IAU 100, we needed to start 2-3 years in advance in really making the plan. What do we want to do? Because then what you want to focus on, say, observing experience or education, or dark and quiet skies was an important one. Inclusiveness was an important one. Looking forward, the next 100 years of astronomy. Then all of these elements need to be part of your of what you're going to do, of your projects, of your activities. And that was something that was very important, to sort of have these goals laid out well in advance. So if we look at sort of our lessons learned, certainly starting years in advance with clear themes was important. Having a central secretariat like the OAO, like Lina, who has very modern communication tools, that was crucial. Establishing a global network of national outreach coordinators, that's also what Lina did. Jorge Rivero as our sort of dedicated project manager was also key in all of this. Was really very important on driving then this network. So this is a much too busy slide, but it's just to give you an indication that once you have sort of your goals, you can make sort of global projects that link to all of these goals, special projects, bottom up basically. So this is top down. You need to have bottom up projects. You need to have astronomy for development. And then outreach and educational materials. And that is how you sort of can then drive this all through this worldwide network. And I think that is the strength of the IAU. Once you have a good idea and a good project, you can actually roll it out over the many countries that are actually connected to the IAU. And that is also one of the legacies, of course, of both the 2009 International Year of Astronomy and the IAU 100, is to have these networks now across more than 100 countries. Some of the other lessons that we learned: making all the material open source. Sound like a no-brainer, but again, it was so important also for the traveling exhibition that could then be translated into so many different languages and rolled out across the world. Active participation, engaging the audiences, so make them, involved in some of the projects, like Name Exoworlds, very successful one. Linking with current issues, especially the pale blue dot, our fragile planet, that was an important one. Embedding inclusivity, and then sort of also having legacy projects after the year for the future. I want to stress again all of the importance of different levels. I mean, we we talk a lot with children, with the general public, but I also want to stress the importance of really high level, having a few high level events once every so often. And we had that with IAU 100, where you can really engage the policymakers. We also need to talk with them because otherwise our voice sort of doesn't get heard at the highest levels. So having very well designed flagship events are also crucial. You need to get people activated. So, for example, in IAU 100, we had kickoff with the 100 hours of astronomy, got people activated, got amateur astronomers activated. And again, they have their huge networks and engaged. Special events. We were fortunate that that year was also 50-year moon landing. You can immediately link them to something that already gets a lot of attention and then build on that and strengthen that by adding sort of events on top of that. Educational days, Astronomy Day in school, something that we are continuing still also in the present years, was another wonderful way of getting many people involved. And then the teacher training across the world, which we did and are still doing, came already out of 2009, but then also is happening still more and more now also with the Office of Astronomy Education. And maybe something what we need to do is the next step is public engagement training across the world, now that we have sort of a program that Kelly has defined. Content remains important as well. You can have all kinds of trainings, but if you don't have the content, that needs to be provided as well. And again, there's being work done at the IAU level of many of these activities, and especially the big ideas in astronomy that the OAE is providing. Astrotourism, dark and quiet skies, is a very important way of engaging with the general public. It's of course very topical now with the satellite constellations. There have been all of these workshops. There's now a new center that we have for the dark and quiet skies, and that is very important to sort of step up those activities in the coming years as the threat to our field actually of these satellite constellations is becoming more and more urgent. And also, of course, the debris that is left in space is also getting a lot of attention. And so here again, there's a lot of opportunities on the one side, but on the other side also, the developing the astrotourism as a way of engaging a lot of people and also having community skilling there. We have seen lots of efforts in empowering women and minority groups, and we're trying to strengthen those activities. Stay tuned for more on that in the coming months. And then finally, I want to end again with the inspiration that we give to the next generation, because for me, that still remains one of the most important aspects, and especially also here, the wonderful words of Minister Pandor that she had at the United Nations meeting on science, astronomy, and diplomacy, and the words that in astronomy inspires curiosity, optimism, and hope. And that is the message that we need to give to these children, and give that in the right way so that they are really engaged, as you see here in all of these examples, because that is really, in the end, also a driver for innovation. So I want to end here and just say how fortunate I am that I started as a chemist, but I'm so actually happy that I transferred into astronomy, because I could never, from a chemistry perspective, had such an inspirational topic to talk about to the general public. So I feel very fortunate that I'm able to do this as a scientist. And in that way, actually provide the excitement, transmit the excitement that we have, the inspiration, the perspective that astronomy brings, or a little bit of a sense of vulnerability, some modesty also. We are that small pale blue dot, intolerance, and basically taking well care of our planet. All kinds of very important messages that we have as astronomers. So thank you for this, and go out and tell your story.
Thank you so much, Avina. As always, an absolutely amazing talk, and I'm sure everybody was fascinated by everything you had to say. We did have a few questions for you, actually, and we've got a bit of time if you don't mind asking a couple of them. So I'll start with the first one that came up. So this is a question from Mariangela, and she asked, how have you dealt with the underlooking at outreach coming from other scientists?
The underlooking, what was the word?
Underlooking, yeah, so I literally said it how she wrote it, but I'm assuming she means the lack of focus or attention paid to outreach by other scientists. So how have you dealt with that?
In my own experience, sort of, and I think that's also consistent with sort of some of the surveys that have been done among astronomers, close to 80 or 90% of astronomers are involved in one or another way of outreach, actually, and public engagement, and they enjoy it. So it does, in the sense that, of course, not everybody has to do it. I mean, you also need to see where are my, what am I good in? What are my skills? But a lot of young scientists, but also senior scientists, are actually involved in one way or another in astronomy outreach, and I think that's great. It's also, as I said already, part of our responsibility, that we have to do that. It's part of our job description, so to say.
Great answer. And we have another question, and this was a question about the images, and they said, how can we get hold of the iconic images?
Yeah, they're everywhere. They're everywhere on the. That's so wonderful. They're everywhere on the websites. And it used to be that you had to go to the STSCI website and try to go to the Hubble archive and find your favorite image, or one of my favorite websites, the Spitzer Space Telescope website. And nowadays you just Google it and the images, and they come up, and it's actually pretty easy to find these days. For the videos, sometimes you have to look a little bit more careful, and you have to know about them. But even there, it's becoming easier to find them. And I can only sort of encourage people to do a little bit of surfing on the web, and it's just amazing everything that you will encounter.
Fantastic. And we have a question from Hex Sanaferat, and they said, it's an amazing talk, thank you very much. But they said, could they ask a somewhat controversial question? And this is, why should we do public engagement? What's the benefit or added value for universities and research institutions? And this may be a question that we could ask for the whole group at the end as well.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think if you don't do it, you'll notice it quickly enough in sort of the public support that you get for your funding. But often it's said that it's before funding. I don't see it that way. I mean, yes, obviously, ultimately the funding that goes to the universities, that goes to our very expensive facilities. Don't underestimate how expensive our facilities are. That's critically important. But I think it's just more generally that again, this comes back to the fact that it's part of your responsibility as a scientist. To tell your story to that. I mean, we are here at the at the courtesy of the taxpayers. They pay our salaries, they pay our facilities. We have to give them something back. If they ask us to give something back to them, we have to give it to them, and we do it gladly because these are inspiring stories.
That's absolutely true. And we do have one or two other questions, but actually I think they may be questions that we can filter to everybody at the end to see if we can get everyone's perspective on that. But I'm going to tell you some comments that you had while you were talking. So we had Lina Needs Space said, it's wonderful to hear explicitly about the value of planetaria in public engagement. The British Association of Planetaria have been doing some phenomenal work during the pandemic and beyond. And we also have a comment from China, from Zhu Jin, who has said, in China, they've just set up at Beijing Planetarium sorry, the IAU and OAE Center in China has just been set up at Beijing Planetarium, and many public engagement activities are performed by some Chinese planetariums and science centers. So thank you so much for your comments, everybody. And if you've got any more comments, please do leave them in the YouTube chat. So thank you again, Avina. It's been wonderful to listen to you as always, and hopefully we'll have time to come back to you at the end with everybody else. But now we're going to move on to our next speakers of today. You're very welcome. Okay, so next up we have two wonderful speakers. We have Fatimata Kibi, who has completed a PhD in astronomy at Sorbonne Université on space debris. 7 years ago, she founded the association Ephemeridis that teaches astronomy to the people living in the disadvantaged areas of the Paris region. We will also be hearing from Maria Drostovska, who received her PhD from Leiden University in the Netherlands in 2016 in the field of astrochemistry. She is currently a Swiss National Science Foundation Ambizione Fellow at the Center for Space and Habitability at the University of Bern in Switzerland. She has served as the co-chair of the IAU Executive Committee of Junior Members for 3 years since its initial establishment in 2018. And she is currently serving a 3-year term as an advisor to this working group. So thank you both, and we look forward to hearing your wonderful talk. Over to you.
So thank you, Jon. So I'm Fatimata Kibi, along my co-chair, along with my colleague Maria Drozdovskaya. We were the first co-chairs of the junior members working group of the IAU, and we are now the advisors of the new organizing committee, which has started its term in last August. Next slide, please. Oops. Yes. So the IAU Junior Members Working Group was formally established in 2018 during the General Assembly in Vienna. And the primary goal of this working group was to increase the participation of the early career researchers in all of the astronomy-related fields in the IAU activities. And during our time with our organizing committee, we have defined several other goals of this working group, which is to build a strong community of early career researchers in astronomy, and a community that will help each other in all of the issues we may face during our at the beginning of our career. And by that, we mean not only finding a postdoc, get a permanent position, or also have some opportunities to move out of astronomy if desired, and also questions about mental health. Next slide, please. So this is the last numbers of the memberships within the junior members of the IAU. So we are almost 900 people, but it should be changed this year, as we will have the General Assembly in Busan next August with some new members to this working group. And as you can see, 2/3 of the junior members are male. And on the other side, most of people are based in Europe and North America. The things to notice is that when you apply to become a junior member, you do not apply according to your nationality, but according to the country you are currently based in at the time you submit your applications. And even if we know that Europe and North America, for example, have a lot of astronomy research, we are still figuring out on how we could have a better distribution with some other parts of the world, such as Africa. Next slide, please. So as I said, so what we intended to do with the organizing committee, the first one, it was to establish a strong community. And for that, we are on most of the social networks like Twitter and Instagram. And we also ask for the help of our community. And for example, the logo of the junior members that you can see on this slide has been made by Dr. Katharina Immer, but it was made under a competition among our community, and we received many submissions. Next slide, please.
All right, so a warm welcome to everybody from my side as well. Hopefully everybody can hear me well. I will continue this presentation with showcasing an example of how to engage with early career astronomers. And the example I'm putting forward here is a photo competition that we ran. This is something that was launched during the pandemic in August 2020, and we had monthly winners. So here you have a very small incentive for people to get engaged, simply becoming a monthly winner of a photo competition. And in fact, what I want to highlight here is that some of the submissions that we received from early careers is actually them participating already in public engagement events. This showcases that early career astronomers are active and really enjoy and take pride in interacting with the public. And this is something that was already touched upon in the first two presentations of today. As there's also the word training in the title of today's event, we should also touch upon how to train early career astronomers. As Avina mentioned, she herself has never had any formal education in public engagement. And this is something that holds true for many researchers, early career and senior. So a potential way of perhaps offering training in public engagement to astronomers could be some sort of online training that they can follow. A perfect platform for that is something that we had set up with our working group, which was the IAU Early Career Astronomer Online Discourse Series. The series featured different discussions on research topics, but also on professional development trainings, how to write a proposal. This is something that we held also during the pandemic times between October 2020 and August 21, and something that we have now offered in the form of recordings on the working group's YouTube channel for everybody to look back to whenever needed. So this is an example of a perfect platform which could feature training on public engagement for astronomers. Fatoumata, you're muted.
Thank you, Maria. So as it was said before, so I founded my association, in fact, 8 years ago, because we had the anniversary last week. And the aim of this association is, so when I was young, I was very interested by astronomy, but where I live, there were no possibilities to learn more about astronomy and space in general. So while I was doing my PhD, I decided to found my own association and to do what I did not have access when I was young. So my association does a lot of activities in Paris and its suburbs. And we do stargazing, for example, in partnership with the French Air and Space Museum, as you can see on the picture on the left. And we also organize some conferences with high-level speakers. So you can see on the right picture, it's Christy Johnson from NASA. And in the public, you can see the people who are trying to target. So it's youth between 11 years old to 18 years old. Next slide, please. So thanks to the support of some organizations and also individuals, the association could organize from time to time some activities in Mali, a West African country, the home country of my parents. As you can see on this picture, we did a hands-on activity, which was to learn more about the solar system and how it works. And I did not have a formal training in outreach, but I do thanks again the IAU, Ewine van Dishoeck and Lina Canas, who gave me opportunity to be one of the IAU outreach visitors. I had the occasion to learn more about what can be done to teach astronomy in many parts of the world, and to take into consideration the means that each organization had enhanced to have access to this beautiful sciences that is astronomy. Next slide.
So I would also like to share with you my personal perspective on why it's important to engage with the public. So first of all, I believe it helps us to stay connected with the big picture of our own research and of our entire field. It is, as mentioned already, a service to the society, which fosters exchange of knowledge, but not only knowledge, but also of competencies. And it is also a very simple way of making the society be part of your research team, which then becomes a team that is much more diverse and very inspiring that you may have daily otherwise. On the grand scheme, public engagement also has some very significant impacts. It increases the trust that the society has in science. In other words, it builds a partnership between all the various stakeholders and scientists, because science is really not something that is done in isolation. Public engagement helps build a relatable and approachable mental image of a scientist. And this is something that immediately counteracts any kind of elitist stigma that there may be. Public engagement promotes fertile grounds and inspires the next generation of diverse scientists. And this is something that is going to naturally enhance inclusivity in science in the long run. And of course, the obvious one, it increases the chances of funding for fundamental, but also for applied sciences. I do see that there are several current problems. First of all, as mentioned, dominant majority of researchers have no specialized training in public engagement. Typically, public outreach is boxed in by the events that are organized by the host institute, and not to mention some of these host institutes may be a lot less proactive than others. Innovative ideas that you may have for public engagement are typically very hard to realize without financing, and securing this financing is not straightforward and also takes time. And typically, these are efforts that are usually much heavier than what ends up being reflected on your CV as a single line. So what could be the possible solutions to these problems? First of all, I think free online trainings on public engagement could be a real success. I think it's up to us as scientists to get help from dedicated individuals at our host institutes that are willing to listen to new ideas directly from the scientists. It would also be great if information on securing funding for public engagement would be a lot more readily available to everyone. And finally, we need to come up with a way to enhance appreciation for the public engagement efforts during hiring. In other words, increasing the direct incentive for scientists to do this. Some small things that we as scientists can do already is very easy. Communicate our research through press releases. This definitely reaches the crowd. We should also take part in the organized public outreach that we can, and it's a lot more fun if we can do it as a team. You could even see it as a team building exercise. And of course, something that we can do every single day is also tell our friends and our social circles what it is that we do. So this brings Fatoumata and I to our final slide, where we'd like to introduce you to Hannah and Camilo, who are the current co-chairs of the working group of junior members. And on this slide, you can find the email address at which you can reach them if you would like to get in touch with the early career astronomers of the IAU. Also, please consider following us on social media. Pick your favorite channel. We also have a Slack working space for exchange of information. And if you'd like to read a bit more about us, you can also find an article in the IAU Catalyst Journal of June 2021. Thank you all very much for your attention.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Maria and Fatoumata, for your great talk. And there's been so much information there that I'm sure people have been really interested in. And we do have a few comments, actually. So I'll just show you some of the comments. No questions as yet, but some of the comments. So we had from Helen Featherstone. Hi, Helen. She said, I love the idea of members of the public being part of your research team. It's a great mindset to have when doing outreach and public engagement. And we also have comments from Mark Flinku. He says, citizen science projects, asteroid detection and images, spectrography, meteor monitoring, etc., are a nice fit to what you were saying about engaging public and enlarging your team. So thank you for your comments. I think we've also got a comment from Byrie Stewart, who has said, I think it might be important to define outreach and public engagement. To some, the words are interchangeable. To others, they're at opposite ends of a spectrum or practice. So thank you for your comments. So I've just got a comment now for everybody just to say, so we're heading into our break, but Just something that I noticed in looking at the comments from everybody and the amount of places people are from, I thought I'd quickly note down all of the amazing places that everyone comes from. And I quickly ran out of space. So I started writing up the side of my page and across the thing. So now I'm just going to say a big shout out to all the places that are actually watching this talk now. And like, I've got to give maximum credit to the IAU. This is some coverage. So here goes. And if I've forgotten anywhere, please do put it in the comments. So a big shout out to all of our listeners from Bangladesh, Greece, Turkey, Germany, Switzerland, Beijing, Brunei, Trinidad and Tobago, Bulgaria, Philippines, Kenya, Austria, Korea, Sweden, Mexico, Portugal, Japan, Nigeria, Iran, Morocco, Belgium, China, India, Netherlands, Brazil, Italy, Israel, Iraq, South Africa, Spain, Mauritania, Ireland, Romania, Glasgow, Lebanon, Wales, Ghana, Slovakia, Nepal, Puerto Rico, Scotland. Well, what can I say? This is an amazing coverage. And, you know, like I said, you've got to give full credit to everyone who's joined in. Thank you again to Maria and Fatimata. And thank you to all of our speakers who have been up so far. So at this point, we are going to take a short break and we will be returning at 20 minutes past the hour. So thank you again for everybody attending, and we shall see you very shortly in about 10 minutes. Thank you.
Should I go ahead and share my screen, or should we wait for that?
Yeah, you can go ahead and share now, and I'll welcome everybody back to the second half. Right, thanks, John. So hello, everybody, and welcome back. We have arrived at the second half, and I hope you guys, you folks are enjoying it so far. And again, if you've got any questions or comments for any of our speakers or in general, please do put them in the YouTube chat function. So we'll be looking forward to seeing some of those. So I also have to shout out a few more countries that I've been informed of. So we've also got people listening from the Dominican Republic or the Republic of Dominica, also from Mauritius, Malaysia, and also Chile, Wisconsin in the USA. So speaking of the US, our next speaker is from the US, and I first was introduced to him early last year. And since then, his work and everything he has been looking into has absolutely changed my outlook and perspective of everything I do. And I've now plowed through loads of his work. So it's an absolute honor to be able to introduce him now. So his name is John Besley, and he is the Ellis N. Brandt Professor of Public Relations at Michigan State University and studies public opinion about science and scientists' views about public communication. He's especially interested in communication strategy and helping scientists foster public trust. He's the author of more than 100 research articles and chapters and receives funding from the National Science Foundation, the USDA, and a range of foundations. His book, Strategic Science Communication, comes out in September with the Johns Hopkins University Press. So without further ado, over to you, John. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and thank you. That's very kind, John. It's very nice. It's wonderful to be able to do some work that people find interesting and helpful, and hopefully I'm going to share some of that research right now. Mainly, I'm going to talk at a fairly conceptual level, but I want to start with a bit of a story. So this article that's on the front there, that was one of a bunch of articles that came out about a decade ago, based around a report based on one question or one set of questions in about a 20,000 word report I wrote for the US government. And I bring it up here because I think of it as an example of kind of a failure of my own, and really a failure to anticipate how people were going to take something that some research that I was working on, and in a way that specifically in the context of trust that I really worry about that might hurt how people perceive science and scientists and astronomy specifically. So on one hand, it's really easy to make fun of people for not knowing about science. You always find questions where people don't know stuff. And I see lots of this kind of examples of this kind of stuff when I look on social media in terms of how scientists talk about other people, whether it's about vaccines, people who don't want to do vaccines, whether it's people around climate change, whether it's around flat Earth. There's lots of folks. It's easy to go on to social media and see scientists making fun of other people. Now, the challenge I have there is, as somebody who studies trust, I don't think making fun of other people is a great way to build trust. And for my own part, I wish, if I could go back in time, that I could have done more when I was working on this to try to find ways to have coverage, to encourage coverage around this report that didn't contribute to that sort of approach of making fun of people as being a funny thing that scientists can do. And so really what I want to talk about today is, so it comes out around that time, about 10 years ago, is really started to switch and focus on strategy, science communication strategy. And so it all sort of came together at the same time. But what I want to talk about today is I want to help you, if I can, think in scientific, sophisticated, specific ways about trust as people perceptions. And we're going to spend a lot of time talking about, we'll look at a little bit of data, but a lot of the time we'll talk about how can we think about this concept of trust in a more granular way. Some of our wonderful colleagues ahead of me have talked about trust and the importance of building trust. But I really want to dive into what that really might mean for science communicators, and particularly the role of astronomy in this. But I'm going to start with a Slido. I'm just curious because I don't know what people know. I don't know if people are able to do this. We'll see if it works. So you would go to answer this poll, you would go to slido.com. You'll see a place to put in a number. There's the number 312-225. Let's see if people can do it. It's going to be a bit of a delay. Well, that's going to make it interesting. I'm not sure how the delay is going to work. But if people can go in and do that, and I'll actually maybe I'll come back to this, but if people could go and do that Slido, and maybe I'll come back to it at the end and see how people have done, just noting the delay. So we'll come back to it. So, but again, what I want to talk about is how to help think about trust. And what I really want to focus on is 3 questions that I'm going to help with things. So one, we're going to talk about why people perceptions matter. We've talked a little bit about that. Then I'm going to ask you really to think hard about how you want to be perceived. And then I want you to think about, and this is where it gets into the training thing. We've done lots, my colleague Anthony Dudo and I, we've done a lot of work around communication training. And one of the things we've noticed is that often we do talk about trust at this sort of general level, but I want you to think about trust at this, let's talk about what you could maybe do to shape how you're perceived. And if you think about these 3 questions, they really fit into how I think of strategy, which is the first one is about goals, the second one is about objectives, and the third one is going to be about tactics. So why do people perceptions matter? We've already know this, but it's really important. And I want to get to one key point. So one, we might say that people perceptions trust matters because we tend to pay more attention to people we see as trustworthy. Sometimes we use the word credible instead. And trustworthy, but if we think of somebody as being trustworthy, we're more likely to pay attention to us. If we decide that somebody isn't worthless, trustworthy, credible, we may just ignore them. Second, we tend to cooperate with people and accept decisions by people we see as trustworthy and fair. Now that's a bit of a funny one when I talk about communication goals, in the sense that, so I sometimes work with astronomy, but I also work across the natural sciences and physical sciences. I sometimes work, for example, with people who study genetically modified food. And sometimes they'll say, well, I want people to love and accept and to support genetically modified food. And you have to say, no, sometimes as science communicators, we don't actually need people to do something to support us. Sometimes we need them to accept, and what we just do is legitimate. Maybe we need to let us build a telescope. Maybe they need to allow us to take the decisions that get made with scientific thinking. So yeah, that decision was made in an acceptable, legitimate way. So trust is sometimes it's about encouraging acceptance. And this third one, we often talk about in science communication, the importance of two-way dialogue, and I of course agree with that entirely. Again, we have to be a bit specific what that means, but one of the ways that trust really matters is not only are people more likely to pay attention to you if you're trustworthy, but the evidence suggests that people are going to share stuff with you. If you're going out and talking to people and looking for ideas, looking for insight, if they don't trust you, they're not going to share. And so there's lots of these good reasons. Now, the key is all of these things, the key to all these things have together, and this is sort of where we think about scientifically about what we mean by trust. Often what we mean is this behavioral trust. I'm going to talk in a second about trust perceptions, but when it comes to trust as a behavior, what we really mean is people making themselves vulnerable to somebody else. And so this trust as a willingness to make oneself vulnerable is really where a lot of the scientific consensus is around. That's what we mean by trust. We mean at a behavioral level, we mean a willingness to make ourselves vulnerable. Broadly speaking, another important reason why we might want to be specific about this kind of things is we need to have this kind of stuff because we need to be specific because, let's use a metaphor, you wouldn't want a chef who only looks at green herbs and says, green herbs, let's just throw them all in there, right? The specificity allows us to do things that we can't do. And of course, a lot of us are going to be in the scientific community, and we know how important it is to be specific in the terminology we use. And so a lot of what I'm doing here is that. And so when I talk about trust as a behavior, I really do mean trust as a willingness to be vulnerable. Now let's go. So that's the goal. So the goal that we're talking about here, that we all want as part of the scientific community, is I often say, we want people to turn to us when faced with complex decisions. We want people to consider careers. We want people to sort of move towards science as a behavior. Now, trust that's a behavior. We can't communicate a behavior. We can't just say, trust me. And so you get into this question of, okay, well, so what leads people to perceive us as trustworthy? I think what we get there is we get into this sort of, there's a whole range of different literatures, uses a bunch of different terminology, and I'll come back to that. But generally, this sort of fits into this trustworthy. We can talk about the difference. We're going to talk about the difference between trust and trustworthiness, which is obnoxious, and it just is. But there's lots of different literatures we're going to draw on here. Essentially, if I look at that literature, I'm going to argue that there's like 5 different perceptions that we could think in a discrete way about. Think like that's a specific thing that, as a communicator, I could either try to ensure that people see me that way, or if we want to flip it and think it 2 ways, these are things that I might want to know about other people. So 5 things, they're right there on their screen. But so I might want to know and might want people to believe that I have integrity, that I'm honest, right? So that's so I call that a communication objective. It's something that I can make communication choices about. I can share information. I'm going to talk about all the different types of communication choices and stuff. But I can make communication choices that make it more or less likely that you perceive me as being honest, having integrity. And if you perceive me that enough times, over time, the hope would be you'd start to believe that I am in fact honest. Similarly, I could make communication choices, things I say, things I do, how I say it, that might make it more likely that you think I'm caring or warm or benevolent. What you'd want to know, you feel that my motivation isn't to hurt you, but it's to help you. Again, a distinct element, a perception that we know from lots of research underlies trust as a behavior. This is the willingness, the one in the middle is the one that I really like, but it's actually not, I'll talk about it in a second, it's not actually part of the core theory around trustworthiness, but I really think it's important for the scientific community. It comes from the literature on procedural justice as fairness. But one of the distinct things that people can believe about scientists and that you can believe about other people is, are they open and willing to listen to others' views? That's a distinct belief. Like, I believe that person is honest, caring, and I think they're also pretty open to listening to other people. I can think, next one's similarity. I can, you know what, that person, they're not that different than me. They're similar to me. They share my values. That's, again, a distinct thing from, yeah, somebody can be really honest, but they don't share my values. So it's this idea about specificity. That's a thing that I could make choices about. I want to make sure that they recognize the values that we share. And then finally, the last one on here, I'm going to argue is it's great, it's important, but it's not for science. We kind of got this one covered. But people think that guy's skilled, that person's knowledgeable, that person really knows what they're talking about. And I often don't emphasize this one too much when I'm talking about science communication strategy, because as I'll mention in a minute, scientists are already doing pretty well on that front. But these other ones, we got to be careful. For those of you who love theory, who are interested and want to dive deeper, my personal sort of favorite body of theory from this is the integrative model, organizational trust. The integrative model is key. And then it points to this idea that they're trying to, when they're developing this, they're trying to take across the social sciences and figure out what works. And if you really, one of the challenges, if you really want to dive into the trust and trustworthiness literature, is people use all kinds of different language to describe these underlying core concepts. But for me, the key thing is to think about what are the nuggets that are underlying this. So on one hand, I mentioned we have the behavior. Trust is a behavior. We can call it credibility, confidence, reputation. It's that big thing, like we want people to do a thing, which might mean not doing a thing. It might mean accepting a decision that's being made using scientific evidence. But on the other hand, we have these other things: expertise, competence, caring. It's just different terms, but they all get at the same thing. One of the things I don't love in the literature is sometimes people use the word trustworthiness to mean integrity, and I just find that confusing, because if somebody is an expert, they're also trustworthy in the degree to which they are experts. And so I tend not to use the trustworthiness language for integrity. I tend to use honesty, moral, ethical, those sort of words. When we develop measures for these things, that becomes really important. This is also really important because this is a 2018 Gallup and Wellcome Trust survey at 140 countries, which is hard to imagine. They did surveys on 140 countries. Still boggles the mind. And part of the survey, 1,000 people in each of these countries, part of the survey was this sort of battery of questions that looked at both trust and trustworthiness. And I have this in the way a little bit, but we can look at, so I did USA and Japan here. Of course, I picked Japan just it's the far side of the world, and it's where the IAU's outreach office is. And what you see is that, at least, well, actually you see it more in the US context than you do in the Japan context. But generally people say, how much do they trust science? And I wish I could move that out of the way. So the yellow is good, the pink is mediocre. This blue over here is sort of bad. But so we want yellow, we don't want blue. I apologize, but I put on that thing at the last minute. And what we generally see around the world is that when it comes to overall trust, sort of, yeah, people kind of trust scientists. And when it comes to accurate information, which I think is how the Wellcome Trust and Gallup operationalized competence, each scientists do pretty well. People tend to think that scientists are pretty competent. That's especially true in the US, which is sort of a little bit hidden here. It's not a little bit less true in Japan, but generally speaking, scientists around the world do pretty well on competence beliefs, where they actually start getting doing a little less well, or we start seeing a little slippage, or if we're being opportunistic, if we're thinking strategically, where we start saying, yeah, there's room for improvement. People aren't exactly sure that's what scientists' motives are, and they're not exactly sure about integrity. That's where we start seeing opportunities. And in fact, so I've done my own research in this area. Make that move away. I've done my own research in this area, sort of trying to build up stuff. And again, this is the same pattern we see whenever we survey about scientists. In general, people think scientists have pretty high levels of competence, but they start to get a little more skeptical when it comes to questions of, are they necessarily have high integrity, and do they have benevolence? Now, they're still pretty good relative to lots of other groups and societies. We're still doing pretty well. This isn't to say we're going to continue to do well forever. We need to do things. We need to make communication choices to make it more likely. But generally speaking, we do really well when it comes to ability, really better than any. When you see, sometimes you'll see data from the US on the National Science Board, this report that I used to write that had that story at the beginning. So this measure of competence, and scientists do almost better than almost everybody else, and stable over time. Everybody else is going down and lower. Over time, scientists have retained confidence. It turns out that confidence measure, if you're really big into it, it's actually a measure of perceived ability. They don't really have questions in that survey about integrity and benevolence. When you start to get an openness, for that matter, and this idea of willingness to listen, you start getting to those now. Instead of being sort of closer to the high end of this 5-point scale, which is good, you start getting towards, getting back towards the midpoint. Still good, again, still good, but not great. And so we start thinking, yes, if we're thinking strategically about building trust through fostering trustworthy perceptions, then we start seeing there's lots of opportunity when it comes to integrity, benevolence, and openness. And then we get to the tactical question. The cool thing about knowing that, the cool thing about being specific and building on the science, is now we can start to have fun conversations about, all right, so given that we might want to make sure that people perceive us as honest and caring, willingness to listen, and similar, what things could we do? What behaviors when we're doing events, when we're writing stories, when we're putting out press releases, when we're appearing in places, how could we behave? How can we set up the room? So this is where I think of, like, when I think of tactics, I think of 5 different sort of things. How can you act? What can you say? How could you say it? Which is tone, style. Are you snarky? Are you mean? Are you friendly? Are you nice? Who should say it? Sometimes we can pick people from a specific community, and then we can also make choices about the channel. Is it face-to-face? Is it on social media? Is it we go through sort of traditional media? But the fun thing about being really specific about these sort of things is we get to make these choices. We get to make we're starting to make specific choices about our tactics based on our goal, build behavioral trust, and our objectives, foster these specific perceptions. And so for example, if we take willingness to listen, we could talk about if that was your objective, is to make sure people perceive you accurately. You shouldn't do any of this, of course, if it's not true. You can't pretend to listen. You can't pretend to be caring. You can't lie about those things, obviously. But if that's your objective, you can start thinking more carefully about, all right, cool, how could I act? What could I say? You could say it. I won't read you. You can read those as well as I can. Now, the challenge with strategies, you can't do everything, right? You can't if you have 60 minutes, 600 words, you can't put 600 words of, here's my motivation, 600 words of, here's why you should think I have integrity. So you got to make choices. You got to do things like look at survey or formative research and say, oh, you know what? One of the problems here is this community doesn't think our motives are what we think our motives are. And so we should talk about that with them. And so we need to make choices ultimately. But that's where we're at. Enough. If I was just going to model a conversation for you, this is what it would look like. Really pushing folks back, pushing the discussion. Like when we start talking about trust, it's like, oh, cool. What is it we want trust on? What specifically are we looking for trust? And then, like, well, we can start talking about what do other people currently believe and what we would like, how we would, again, back to this original question, is how do we want people to perceive us? To me, that's the conversation when we're having strategic communication, when we're building training. These are the conversations we need to model and have. And I'll just finish with for the astronomy community. I mean, one of the cool things about the astronomy community, of course, is that you guys have access to people in ways where people are coming in with lots of joy, lots of excitement, lots of interest. And fundamentally, the thing we should do is be the people we want to be, our best selves, and do that. We should also, of course, as individual scientists, we should ask for help. Increasingly, I'm of the belief that individual scientists isn't where we need to focus on them, but we need to focus on bringing them into organizational sort of discussions around things like, how can we, as a community of scientists, as an organization of, or organizations of scientists, how can we make smart choices, strategic choices, evidence-based choices about what to emphasize, picking our events, picking our activities based on how we want people to perceive and what we want to learn about the people around us. And sometimes I think for that, because if you get more specific, you get more evidence-based, you start benefiting from the types of help that professional communicators can give. So I'm always encouraging folks, yes, scientists, get your training, learn to be a great speaker. But then as you get more serious into this, start asking, there's people around you often, start finding ways to get help from your colleagues and collaborating around communication. And I'll stop there and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much, Jon, for your amazing talk, as always. And I'm just going to check if we have any questions. Remember, everybody, if you've got any questions for us, please do put them in the chat. And Jon, I did want to mention that I think some people tried to access the Slido, but I think they couldn't see the questions. So I wondered if you wanted to try and run the Slido again.
So it's there. Oh, there we go. We got one answer on the Slido. I just pulled it back up.
Brilliant. So anybody, we're just pulling back up the Slido poll. So if any of you would like to,
yeah, we can leave this.
Yeah,
on
brilliant.
Here. That's perfect. Yeah, I didn't.
Absolutely.
The delay thing. That was the delay got me there.
Yeah, I know. And so everybody listening and watching on YouTube, just to let you know, we've got a 20-second delay between us and you. So when the Slido goes up, for us, we have to wait 20 seconds for you to actually start engaging. So if there's any, if there's any awkward delays, we apologize for that.
Oh, wow. But yeah, I appreciate people doing it now because this is really helpful for me because I talk about trust, like I spend a good chunk of my life reading and talking about trustworthiness. I don't know what people know. I mean, I sort of have a sense from doing interviews with trainers and interviews with scientists that they're not thinking it at the granular level that I think of. And I think it's useful to, obviously I just gave a presentation. I think it's useful to think it at that granular level when you're building strategy. So yeah, anyway, so yeah, happy to questions. If people have questions, shoot, I love talking about this stuff.
Excellent. I'm just fielding some of the questions now, so I can tell you some comments. You've got amazing talk. Someone else has said, it's there now, hooray. So someone else has asked if the slides for this presentation, e.g. in PDF, are available or will be available. I believe that the best way to view it would be to watch the video. And again, I'm afraid I don't know if the slides are available separately.
I do. So I'll put them up on SlideShare. I put all my talks up on my video. I don't have the videos, but just the slides will go up on SlideShare, which is slideshare.net, slideshare.com, slideshare.something. But SlideShare. They're not. I don't think I put these ones up there yet, but I'll put them up.
Excellent. So there you go. So we'll see who asked that question. So so for Vindra, yes, there you go. The slides will actually be available, which is fantastic. I'm just getting across some of these other questions, but I'll ask you the first question, Jon, and that's from Vari Stewart. She's got a question, and she asked, what indicators would you recommend for evaluation strategies to indicate levels of audience trust in a message from an activity?
Yeah, so we did, hopefully we'll have a paper coming out where we made this really short questionnaire for science festivals in the United States. But generally speaking, I think it's not so complicated. You know, as an academic, I want to ask like 5 questions about each subdimension of trustworthiness. But for like an event, I would say like the behavioral trust is, will you be willing to take advice from, to what degree would you be willing to take advice from this person if it's an advice thing or come to another talk? So some sort of behavior that indicates vulnerability. Generally taking advice from is sort of being vulnerable. And then when you get to these subdimensions, it's really pretty straightforward. Like, to what degree would you see this person as, to what degree did this speaker seem honest or dishonest, very dishonest, somewhat dishonest? To what degree did this speaker seem to care about people like you? Did not seem to care at all. You know, that sort of, you can build those out. They don't need to be super complicated. But the key is asking about each of those subdimensions, right? Asking, did this person seem willing? To what degree did this person seem willing to listen? To what degree did this person seem caring? To what degree did this person seem to have high integrity? To what degree did this person seem competent and or knowledgeable or skilled, or whichever word you want. If you go into that, our paper, they have like there's 5-6 item measures. You can probably just pick for most like evaluation quick events, you could just pick sort of one question from each thing, the one that makes the most sense to your context. And I think that'd be a great start. If you have time and space, ask more questions about each of those subdimensions. But differentiating between the dimensions and ultimately some sort of summary measure of, would you be willing to take advice from this person? Do you think it's this, maybe for astronomy, do you think this person should receive public funding? You know, what maybe that's a vulnerability. It's like, I want to give you my tax dollars. That's vulnerability. And so it's an element of trust. I hope that helps.
Fantastic. Thank you, John. And we have another question from DD0133. Sorry if I don't have your actual name, so I'll use your R2D2 version instead. So the question is, mistrust can be a useful defense mechanism in a society that follows its own purpose and only that. Is it ethical to teach people to act trustworthy?
We spent a lot. I've been trying to convince one of my applied philosopher friends to really dive into this with me. But so the best we can come up with is, my current thinking is that if you believe that you have pro-social motivations, if you're trying to help, it's okay to say that you're trying to help. If you are doing lots to ensure the integrity of your work, it's okay to tell people that what you're doing to ensure the integrity of your work. If you have worked hard to do really high competent, high skilled stuff, it's okay to tell people that. And so, yes, I think it's okay to share your competence. We've done this, another project we hopefully will have coming out at some point, is we did this survey where we asked people, do they want that information, like the public, like a sample of sort of general public sample, general population sample. We asked them, do people want that information? And then specifically, how much time? Do you imagine a 60-minute talk? Would you want a scientist to share that stuff? And they want a minute or two for these things. There's a little bit of time. They want scientists to only talk about why they should be trusted, but they do want that information. People use that information. And so, yes, I do think it is ethical. I also think there's another fun ethical part, which is just because you don't emphasize it doesn't mean they won't make these judgments. People are going to make trustworthiness judgments no matter what. And so they're going to make it based on what you say. And if you don't say something, and what you say and how you say it and where you say it and all the things, they're going to make those judgments. And so the degree is really, do you want to sort of play a role in helping in an ethical way guide those things? Also, making this really long, people are going to say negative. So we talk about misinformation, kind of again, I would argue, not a specific term. People are going to put misinformation about each of these perceptions, right? People can do misinformation about my integrity, about my motivations, about my willingness to listen. And so if I'm not sharing information about what I am doing, somebody else is going to share that information, possibly not the information that I think is helpful. So we can do what we can do. And one of the things we can do is share this type of trustworthiness related information if we want to foster trust as a behavior.
Fantastic. And we also have a question from Wonderclate, who has asked simply, so denialism is actually a trust issue?
So how do I think about that? So it is. So this gets into a much broader thing of what we talk about as motivated reasoning, right? So what's the best way to do it? So one of the things that happens is let's go to a different slide here. So yes, thank you very much for doing that slide. Let me go to a different slide. I want this one, right? So one of the things that happens that's similar, believing that somebody is similar to you. One of the things that happens we talk about polarization. If we do make communication choices that make people believe that you're you and I'm me and we're different. You're in your tribe and I'm in my tribe. You're in your group, I'm in my group, whatever the terminology we use. People then try to figure out what people in their group believe, and they're more motivated to believe what other people in their group believe rather than motivated to believe what's correct, right? They have limited, everybody has limited time and attention for the world. And so we're being cognitive misers, and we're trying to figure out how to get through the world. And one of the things that makes sense of the world. And one of the things we do is we want to figure out what do other people like me, similar to me, important to me, believe. And we want to figure that out. And so denialism, I don't like that term because it's one of these sort of negative terms that I worry doesn't help foster trust. It sort of others other people, ironically. But I think it has to do with people's tendency towards, people will choose to disagree with scientific consensus because that seems to be what their people like them believe. And so what I really worry about is communication that encourages people to think of themselves as different than the scientific community or than scientists, because that will encourage people to seek out information that's against the consensus, which some people might call denial. I would just call holding incorrect beliefs.
Thank you. And speaking of seeking out information, we have a question from Kate Meredith, which is, if there was a paper or document you would recommend for outreach professionals to read on this topic, what would it be?
Well, am I allowed to plug books? I don't know. Wait, let's see if I get back to the other slide here.
Do it.
So that's going to come out in September. So that we think that's going to be pretty good. It's going to sort of, the first 5 of the chapters are about different subdimensions of trust, and then there's other chapters on other potential communication objectives beyond trust beliefs about risks and benefits, beliefs about social norms, beliefs about efficacy, feelings, frames, other potential communication objectives. So that'll be one. I'm going to encourage you to go there eventually, but September, still a little bit of time. Other than that, so let's go back. I mean, we tried to do, there it is. We tried to make this one pretty accessible, though maybe it's not so accessible. I mean, it is an academic journal. We've tried to write about this. So the conversation, if you look up stuff we've written on the conversation, we've talked about some of these things. In particular, actually, there's one that I kind of like. It's self-promoting. Nevertheless, there's one that I like that like people always say in this, know your audience. And so I like, well, what do you want to know about your audience? Again, kind of vague. Let's be specific. What do you want to know about your audience? I would argue one of the things you want to know about your audience is how do they perceive you when it comes to ability, integrity, benevolence. And so there's an article on the conversation. If you look me up on the conversation where we make that argument. Other good ones. So Susan Fisk has a nice book. I read a lot of popular social science. Susan Fisk has a nice book. I don't have a slide for it on she just differentiates between warmth and competence, but how companies have communicate. I spent a lot of time in the last couple of years reading strategy books, and it turns out there isn't that much on science communication specific strategy, or even communication specific strategy beyond behavior change literature, which is good. And so I got into the business and military strategy. In the business strategy world, there's a good sort of discussion around, particularly the Susan Fisk, Chris Malone book, whose name I cannot remember, on communicating warmth and competence for brands. But I think conceptually, this is the weird thing. Like we got to focus right in on only on astronomy, or only on science communication, or only on the concepts. These concepts are about people, and people are people. Turns out most of the places that people are. And so these things, that people use these concepts all over the world.
Fantastic. Now we do have a few different questions, and some of them I think we may save for actually at the end, so we can field them to everybody. But I have a specific question that was fielded towards you, and it says, you said at the beginning about wanting people to turn to science. How do you feel about inviting people to critique science rather than just accept science? And that's from Helen Featherstone.
Yeah, so I feel great about it within reason. Much as I feel great about it when people critique me. On one hand, you need it. You can't get better without it. So absolutely. There is a point where it goes where it, not that it goes too far, but yeah. And so most of my research is, so I sort of take as a sort of starting point is that the natural and social science, natural, physical, and social sciences have insight that can provide. It's an epistemology that helps really make sense of the world. It turns out to be a pretty good one for the most part. Lots of terrible things done in the name of science, lots of DEI, there's lots of things that science is not a perfect thing. And so we should make science more perfect. If we go back to my last slide, we should be the thing we want to be. We should work really hard to be the group we want to be. And so, yes, so I think we should critique ourselves. We should invite critiques from other folks, but that shouldn't get in the way of saying, like, you know, we do think we have a pretty good way of making sense when we do it right, when we do it ethically, when we do it, we can do both of those things. We can accept criticism openly with joy while still saying, you know, I still think we got a good way to make sense of stuff here. So let's try it out. Let's see if it works. So much of everything in life is right. It's not about what you do, it's how you do it. And so there's ways of doing it that I think are great. There's ways that I think are unproductive. There's ways, but so if we go back to communication strategy, I think we need to invite those critiques and we need to respond to those critiques with love and joy and all the good things. And so sometimes I give a talk on goals. And so I say my goal is often to get people to turn to science when faced with difficult things. Another goal that I have, another classic sort of core goal is I want to make sure that I am open to changing my research methods or questions when I hear new information. It's a separate goal. So it's like, so I'm not just have a goal for what do I want other people to do, maybe, but I also have a goal for like, well, I'm communicating, so I better have a goal for changing my own stuff, if that makes sense based on what I hear and see and do. Well, that's kind of I don't know if that's a good answer, but that's what I got.
Well, the thing is, in extension to the critique question, we have another question from Vindra who's mentioned that sometimes a club does not want to be vulnerable and asks for feedback or critique from its audience. How can one get buy-in from club members to be vulnerable?
Sorry, do it again, to read that. So I got to,
so
I'm hearing the question again. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. So the main question is, so it says sometimes a club does not want to be vulnerable and they don't want to ask for feedback or critique from the audience. So the question is, how can one get buy-in from club members to be vulnerable?
That's great. That's a different way of thinking about vulnerable. So when I think about trust as being, but yeah, so you need to, yeah, it's a fun way of talking about vulnerability. So this is where I really, again, a point at the end that another talk I give, is the important role that we can call them different things, boundary spanners, communication professionals, can play in this sort of stuff, where you have people who can help span those boundaries in the ways that people, it's hard taking criticism. I don't like it. No, but maybe there's people who love it. It's not me. And so, but one of the ways that we can do that is by having people who help me do that, right? Who have people that buffer, maybe buffer people. Like it's that can matter. And also, I think you don't have to go like dive right in, right? You can sort of like get better at it, like a little bit of vulnerability, and then a little, because so I come from this sort of long-term effects model of communication, and so where the effects are cumulative. I'm not really interested in training that emphasizes, hey, go to say this thing and they're going to do that thing, like that sort of immediate. I don't care about that in the room persuasion stuff. I'm interested in long-term helping people be perceived in ways they want to be perceived, and then long-term belief formation. Same thing with trust building. I don't believe you're going to build trust in the room at that moment. It's about over time we're going to build trust. We're going to make ourselves vulnerable. So yeah, I think you start small. You work with boundary spanners. Start small. Look for opportunities to bring input into the conversation. Fundamentally, though, I mean, I do think actually one of the really good book, Naomi Oreskes, on the word trust is built in the text. 2 words. One of them is trust. I can't remember the name, but her new book on science has this great discussion of like, a consensus of white men is not a consensus. Like that's not, and so this idea of the scientific community needs to find ways to be open to the world around us and not do things like make fun of other people. And so sometimes we're going to need to, within organizations, within societies, within whatever, we're going to build up to that vulnerability. You don't have to do it all at once. You don't just throw open your door and yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Jon, for all of your insightful answers. And there's been so many other questions. And if your question was in the chat and hasn't been asked, I have seen it and I have logged it. And it's because I want to open up those questions to all of the team as well. So I know some of them are specific to Jon, but I will field them to Jon at the end. And then if any of the other members have anything to add, then they can add at the same time. So thank you for all your wonderful questions and for your interest in the talk, everybody. Yeah. So this is fantastic.
Thank you so much for letting me share this stuff, guys.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. Now, next up, last but absolutely not least, is a person that is the reason that we've actually got this whole seminar together. And I must just say on a personal note, I met Kelly just before I actually started my role at Leiden University. And since then, we've managed to work together on many different ideas and share lots of thoughts on like science communication, outreach, public engagement, and basically just loads of stuff and more. And it's been an absolute pleasure to work alongside Kelly over the last almost a year. And so that has been wonderful. And as a result, it is my absolute pleasure to be here now to introduce her, to talk about herself and some of the stuff she's done in her experiences, and also about these wonderful materials that she's put together. So here's the formal introduction. So Kelly Blumenthal is currently the project manager for the IAU Public Engagement Training. She's passionate about public engagement with science, particularly as it relates to issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. Her work in outreach and astronomy engagement has led her to the IAU Office for Astronomy Outreach, where she will take up the role of Deputy Director in March. So, with great pleasure, I'd like to hand over to Kelly Blumenthal.
Let me unmute myself, that will help. Hello, thank you, Jon. Thank you very much for moderating too. You've been doing a wonderful job. And thank you to everyone for being here and sticking around until the very end. Today I'd like to talk a bit about the history of outreach within the IAU, the formation of the Office for Astronomy Outreach, and then the public engagement training project that I've been a part of and working on this last year. And I apologize for my dog in the background if you can hear him. All right, so through its members and the scientific commissions and divisions, the IAU has always been involved with outreach. Over time, they formed the Commission 55, which was known as the Communicating Astronomy to the Public, and that was very active. They held communications conferences, they operated the Communicating Astronomy with the Public Journal, and in fact, it was actually members of C55 who spearheaded the effort for the International Year of Astronomy in 2009 that you heard about earlier in the talks today. So the goal of this year-long project was to prompt people to rediscover their place in the universe through their relationship with the sky. They wanted to spread awareness of astronomy and to do so through inclusive and equitable means, in part by promoting the involvement of underrepresented groups in STEM careers. All told, 148 countries partnered in 28 global projects, totaling in more than 800 million people reached. So the Office for Astronomy Outreach was established based on the International Year of Astronomy's resounding success. And it was meant to carry on the momentum of the projects that had started. The office was officially founded in 2012 in a joint venture with the National Astronomical Observatory of Japan. So in its decadal survey, the IAU identified a series of strategic goals, one of which defines the function of the Office for Astronomy Outreach. That is that the IAU engages the public in astronomy through access to astronomical information and communication of the science of astronomy. And today we serve as the outreach center for the IAU. We provide skill building for astronomy outreach professionals, and we coordinate IAU outreach projects that live up to the expectations of the International Year of Astronomy. Now, two of these projects are particularly worthy of note. The first was the International Year of Light, which was actually a project initiated by the United Nations and supported by a number of organizations worldwide, of course, including the IAU. Under the theme of cosmic light, the IAU's International Year of Light once again had global reach, featuring 5 cornerstone projects, 22 additional outreach efforts, which resulted in thousands of activities, events, and exhibits worldwide. And then the second, which we also heard about today, was the IAU's 100th anniversary celebration in 2019. And again, this saw a tremendous amount of outreach efforts across the globe. Among other things, our goals were to promote the awareness and access to astronomy through inclusivity, and to promote astronomy as a tool for diplomacy, education, and development. We had over 5,000 activities in 143 different countries and reached more than 100 million people. Now, between the milestone projects that we've had, we keep the community engaged on a yearly basis through events such as our the 4 global outreach programs, some of which actually have their roots in the IAU 100 celebrations. And we also offer a range of professional development and outreach for the astronomical community itself. Now, our overarching goal is to make astronomy accessible to everyone. We do this through the promotion of interactions between various different stakeholders. We do this through translations, through open source materials that are understandable to a non-expert, and a representative network of outreach professionals. And the only way we keep it all running is with the help and support of our national outreach coordinators. These are an international network of brilliant astronomy professionals, including amateur astronomers, research scientists, and outreach professionals. The NOCs are truly an essential part of the operations of the Office for Astronomy Outreach. Now, during our last review, we came up with a set of strategic actions to help us meet our goals under this theme of astronomy for everyone. You can read these on your own, but the one that I think that's most relevant for today is this one, that we shall encourage the communication of science and critical thinking through IAU member public engagement, professional amateur and citizen science activities. This leads us to a project that I've been working on for the last year, the IAU Public Engagement Training Program. Now, as you've heard from others before me, this was a partnership between the Cavali Foundation and the IAU to create an evidence-based training workshop for IAU astronomers. Everything we did was based in the science of science communication, bridging the gap between research and practice.
Hi, Kelly. Can I just interrupt? Sorry, I think some of your screen is cut out. It's only showing the top left majority of it.
That's embarrassing. I'm so sorry about that.
No, sorry, okay? I should have mixed it. Yes, it is. Fantastic. I hope that has helped everybody in the chat. Thanks, Kelly. Please continue.
I'm so sorry about that, guys. I really, really am. Well, hopefully everything I was saying was on the slides anyway, so hopefully that was okay. But this will be fixed by now. Okay, great. If there's any other problem, please interrupt me and let me know. Anyway, so this project was overseen by a steering committee that was composed of researchers and practitioners in astronomy communication. Some of the people up here you've heard from, some very recently, and some I hope you have the opportunity to go and listen to and hear them speak and talk about their work. I'm really grateful that I had the opportunity to work with this group of individuals because their guidance has really been invaluable. So this workshop that we created as a result of this program was co-created with members of the IAU community. I met with 3 focus groups, and that goes composed of astronomy communicators, astronomy communication organizers, and astronomers to discuss their needs in astronomy communication practice and training. In the end, after much discussion with the community members and with the steering committee, we decided to create a workshop on relationship building. Now, I will admit that this is not the most typical workshop topic. So I think it's worth spending a little bit of time to answer this question, even though John Besley just answered a lot of it for us. But one of the community members that was present in the focus groups discussed how fundamental relationships are to their work. Namely that, quote, it's when we need to have a really difficult conversation where problem solving is required that having long-standing trusted relationships is paramount, end quote. Now, I thought this was particularly powerful because difficult conversations are so common when you're doing some kind of science communication event. And what this really boils down to is relying on those relationships to help you communicate better. And as John Besley was talking about, there's ample research to support this too. It's been shown that building trust is tantamount to building relationships, and that trust relies on perceptions of competence, of warmth, integrity, and openness. So showing a willingness to be open or a willingness to listen, expressing warmth or displaying integrity and competence. These are all ways to build trust with your audience, whomever they may be. One reason we might consider this to be important is because people's attitudes about science depend, at least in part, on trust, but also on their identity. And that identity is entwined with their cultural context, which can shape the way we interpret, perceive, and consider scientific information. In fact, it's been shown that people are generally more likely to accept information from someone who shares their values and their identity. So it's really clear how this can deeply impact science communication. So this workshop focuses on relationship building because focusing on relationships naturally leads to a whole host of other topics that bolster the effective communication of science. So of course, the workshop that we built focuses on relationship building, but it also emphasizes strategic science communication. And it encourages its participants to build up their networks through the workshop itself. The original workshop was primarily case study based. However, it was noted during our pilot that the participants want more ways to engage with evidence from the literature. We did run this pilot, which ran in October, and that took place on only one day and lasted about 5.5 hours. Now that overtime of about an hour and a half, that was not dictated by me, thankfully. That was arrived at by consensus of the participants in the workshop who continually requested more time for large and small group discussions. Overall, the pilot was successful. Though there was certainly room for improvement, people left with a broader understanding of what's necessary to foster better communication with their audiences, which was one of our core objectives. And since October, we spent some time updating the workshop according to the feedback from the pilot program. The focus is still the same, but we've added significantly more discussion of literature while keeping some of the case studies as worked examples. The new workshop splits about 10 hours over 2 days, separated by hopefully at least a week. And this workshop is importantly open access. And that means that everyone is free to reuse, revise, remix, redistribute, review these materials in whatever way they see fit. And at some point in the near future, we're going to have a website for this project and other training materials that follow. And my hope is that members of the community will use this space not only to upload their localized versions of the workshop made specific for their communities, or maybe even translated into their own language, but also as a forum for public engagement training, further expanding our network of trainers in the astronomical community worldwide. So the materials that I've prepared for open access distribution include a facilitator's guide, a review of the literature, which takes the form of an annotated bibliography, and then a workbook for participant use during the workshop itself. And of course, a corresponding slide deck. So in the link in the description below, that'll lead you to the IAU announcement page that contains a PDF for the first 3 documents, and then a separate link to download the slides. The facilitator's guide contains pre-work for the facilitator and gives ample details on how to guide activities and discussions. I provide some tips and tricks based on my own experience running this workshop in particular, and others kind of like it. Now, my goal with the literature review was to get an overview of the science of science communication as it pertains to trust and relationship building. And I do this from a variety of different fields, including public relations, health and medicine, biology, ecology, and of course, astronomy. I noted before that this is an annotated bibliography, and for those of you who aren't familiar, that just means it's a list of papers with a short paragraph describing the contents of each paper following the citation. Now, it's by no means a comprehensive list of research papers, and unfortunately, it's very Anglo-centric, but it is a good place to start and to get you started in your own literature search. So the workbook is the document that workshop participants will use during the workshop itself. In it, they have the space to take notes, complete worksheets, follow along with group discussions, and follow along with activities as well. It also includes the beginnings of a relationship building toolkit that contains worksheets and resources to get them started. And then finally, the workshop slide deck contains all the slides needed to run the workshop. It's totally customizable and available both as a PowerPoint presentation and as a Google Slides document. But please make sure to read the presenter notes for personalization suggestions and some thoughts on how to run the workshop at each point. Again, the full URL should be available in the link description below, YouTube description below rather. But if you'd like to follow this shorter URL, you're more than welcome to. It'll take you to the same IAU announcement page where you can download all the materials for your own use. I hope that you have the opportunity to use this. And please let me know if you do and how you do. I'd really love to know how you've customized it to reflect your own communities. So I'd just quickly like to say thank you all for participating in the seminar. It's been really great to have the opportunity to plan something like this and to actually operate it and see it come to fruition. I'd like to also thank our speakers that we've heard from over the last, actually less time than I thought, 2.25 hours, to our MC, Jon Chase, and my fellow organizers, Pedro, Russo, and Lina, Canas. We also had an amazing team working to promote this event. So thank you to Gitu Palos, Maggie Rodriguez, and Susanna Filipenki Martins. And then finally, I really need to thank our magician of a graphic designer, Aneta Margraf-Trush, who worked so hard and so quickly to make everything look absolutely beautiful. There are many more people whom I don't have time to thank, and this is not an Oscar speech, but really thank you to everyone who helped out, who was involved in the event and in the public engagement training program. Yeah, thank you. Okay, you can take it, Jon.
Thank you very much, Kelly. Sorry, I was just reading the comments and trying to find a solution to one of the last comments. But absolutely wonderful, and all that hard work you put into it. We really do hope that the community will be able to make full use of this and share it wide to the whole world, pretty much. So we did have just some questions, or some brief questions. So it was one was, can we send back translated versions to OAO?
Yes, please do.
Okay.
That'll be the function of the website, is we'll have a space for people to upload that stuff. But until we have that website up and running, please send it to me or anyone at the OAO. We'll be happy to take it.
Excellent. And Kate Meredith has also asked, can you post that URL? And so what I'll do
it
is
should be in the description.
Yes. It is actually, yes, for the materials.
It's the same URL.
To download the materials.
This is just the shorter version of it, but what's in the description will lead you to the same place. Also, hi, Kate.
Awesome. And well, brilliant. Oh, and also Helen, as mentioned, really helpful bibliography. Thank you. So a few people are finding that useful, even Mari as well. So thank you so much for your talk. And we do have a few questions from before as well. So we've got some questions that were presented during Jon's talk, but I thought it'd be really good if we could open up some of these questions to all of you, because some of them are relevant to more than just Jon's talk as well. So even though they're focused on Jon's talk, I believe some of you may have some insights that you'd like to offer. So if we could welcome all of our speakers back, and I'll go through the few that was particularly aired at Jon, but relevant to your talk, Kelly, first, and then we'll speak to some of the more open questions after that. So, okay, so we have a question here from Axel, who was asked, it says, it seems like integrative strategic science communication could be fundamentally centered around trust relationships. This would focus on two-way symmetrical communication, or true participation, he's put in brackets. Do you agree? So I guess that would be to Kelly and Jon, I guess.
Go for it.
Oh, do you want to jump in first?
You're bound to have more intelligent things to say about this than I do.
I'm sure that's not true. So of course, I have thought about this topic a lot. So there's this idea in science communication that we went from deficit to dialogue, and I actually have a challenge with that. Deficit is a theory, is a concept that if people don't know enough, they're not going to have positive attitudes about science. Dialogue is a tactic. It's a thing we do. We engage in dialogue. We take part. It's an activity. It's a thing we do. The thing about dialogue that's really awesome is that it requires our attention, and it gives us all these opportunities to have effects on other people and for other people to have effects on us. And so the idea that we do this, it's a really hard thing to talk about though, but conceptually what we're thinking about is when I engage in dialogue, they're changing, we hope, I'm making arguments, I'm sharing my insights. I hope that I'm changing maybe their beliefs about how they perceive me. Do they think I'm honest and caring and competent and willing to listen? I'm also hoping maybe I'm changing their perceptions of risks and benefits. Maybe they're changing their perceptions of social norms. Maybe they're changing their perceptions of whether or not they feel like they have self-efficacy. Maybe they're feeling certain things or they're reframing something. At the same time, the two-way bit is, I hope that if I'm paying attention, I'm rethinking how I think, right? I'm like, oh yeah, I'm changing my beliefs about them, about the object that we're talking about other people. And so the two-way bit is just recognizing that, yeah, we're in a dialogue and we're going to have effects on each other. If I believe in symmetrical communication, I am going into every communication opportunity with the idea that I hope that I hear something, learn something, feel something that changes that helps me make better sense of the world. And that's where I think that's what I mean by two-way symmetrical communication. I'm going into, so there's the asymmetrical communication, which is I just want to learn about you so I can reshape you. That's not cool. What we got to be doing is like going in, but it's okay. I can't emphasize enough. I really, and then the ethics thing, I really think it's okay for people to share our insights and say, I think it would be cool if you believed what I believe, but I'm open to not believing that anymore if you have a better argument. I think that's okay.
And Kelly, just to check if you'd like to add anything on the conversation of relationships, I can repeat the question if you'd like, or if there's anything that springs to mind, or I could ask a different question.
No, I think that's great. I think I've heard Jon talk about that quite a little bit. So great to hear it again.
Okay, brilliant. So now I'm going to move over to generally some questions about perception of science and scientists. And I have two questions to field, and I'd like to see what all of you have to think about these questions. So the first question is from Elsa Maria. I'm sorry if I've pronounced it wrong. The question is, do you think social media is a danger to the perception of science and scientists? Let's open up to anybody who would like to answer. And I know Jon has said, guys, go first. I've got lots of things that I'm saying. So anyone else, please do go first and then we'll work away.
I am not on social media, so I think somebody else should. but there's a reason I'm not on social media, because it has wonderful opportunities for communicating things, but there's definitely also a danger side there. So I hope that some of the other speakers can elaborate a little bit more on that.
Yeah, I can give some comments. So social media can be a great tool to do some outreach, but also it's a bit dangerous when you see all of these conspiracy theories. But I think that we should not disappear from these platforms. We need to have some scientists doing their jobs, being there and being accessible to the general public. Because as we said, like nature doesn't like a vacuum. And if we are not there, someone else who's not a scientist will take this seat. So that's why we have to be there, and we have to be able to answer and to give some information from time to time. And we have seen that we had some major discoveries in the last years, and we have seen many people following the astronomers on Twitter, on Instagram, and etc. I can take the example of Jonathan McDowell on Twitter. So a lot of people are following Jonathan McDowell to know more about Starlink and about how the space activities is impacting the dark sky, and also how important the dark sky is for us.
That was an absolutely wonderful answer, Fatimata. I love that. John, did you have anything to add?
I mean, so yeah, that is a perfect answer. I will add two things. One, I think one of the dangers that I worry about is scientists going online and seeing their colleagues being jerks and thinking, I can be a jerk too. And so there's a social norm that I think develops when people see other people in their community saying mean things about other people, and then they think that's an acceptable thing. And so I think we have to be careful about our own internal science communication norms about it's not okay to go online and call people idiots because they don't know something about astronomy or something about vaccines. It's not okay. That's not how we want to talk about other people. And so there's that bit. Oh, and but the other part is I should have meant it during when I was talking, was that Cavali process that Brooke Smith talked about at the beginning. She talked about the challenge for sort of discovery science, or sort of the basic sciences, like what's the role for them, and they don't have these sort of specific goals that they want to achieve. And so yeah, the astronomy community I think is really cool. You can think like, you guys, if you wanted, you have an opportunity to be like sort of an ambassador, like one of the great people, great groups of science. We're like out there being this positive voice, this voice of caring and integrity and joy. I think that's great.
Great answer. Thank you, John. And on a related question, we had a question from Yale Burrell, who I actually recognize the name of. So awesome. Thanks for questioning. She said, hi, John. Thanks for this great talk. Do you predict a change in public perception of science and scientists as a side effect of COVID-19?
So I just pulled up. Pew Research Foundation just released some data for the US that shows that perceptions maybe have so they went, so there's a couple things. So one, it's pretty high, so but it gets high on the confidence, which I think is ability perceptions. What you see is polarization. There is an active effort by certain groups in society to push people away from society, and so whereas in the US, more progressive liberal folks have sort of stayed stable or gone up a little bit in their perceptions, more conservative groups have gone down. And again, this is where I hate even talking about it in some way, because I don't want people to say, oh, that's on up. Like, to some extent, yes, there's people actively working to make that happen. On the other hand, we can do what we can do. And so I think there's a degree to which we need to be thinking about how do we be how do we do our part? So I don't know if it hadn't been COVID-19, maybe it would have been something else. Maybe it would have been climate change. And so, yeah, there is this polarization. Generally, it's still pretty strong. And I also think it's worth thinking about, even when people say that they're are disagreeing with the scientific consensus, they still do it from the perspective of science. So people still want to say that their perspective is evidence-based. And so I think, it's not great. but we're still doing okay. We could always do better, especially on the integrity and caring and willingness to listen.
Fantastic. And would anybody else like to add any comments on the effects of COVID-19 on trust in science and scientists?
Not specifically on the COVID-19 points, but I've heard indeed in the past also the comment that sometimes the trust in science is higher than the trust in scientists. And I guess it has to do with this aspect of science being also the competency part and scientists having also the other aspects. I mean, do you agree with this, John? Have you heard that also before? This was well before COVID that I heard this comment.
No, but I've tried to get money for someone to let me do that, because I do think there is some differences there. But again, it's really depends on trust. Like, how much do you? So when somebody asks in a survey, how much do you trust? I just don't know what that means. Versus, do you think this person is caring or competent? And so I love my survey colleagues. I wish they asked these more granular questions, because that's where that trust one there's just mushes too much in there that it's hard to know what I'm really looking at in terms of survey data.
Fantastic. And we have a couple more questions. We've got a few more minutes, so I'm going to field some of these and hopefully you'll find them of interest. So we've got a question that said, there are people doing outreach, and this is from Christian Dimacali. There are people doing outreach who are not necessarily active in astronomy research yet. What advice can you give them, or us, on establishing trust or credibility with the audience, i.e. the general public? And that can be fielded to anybody.
I think I can talk about that a little bit. I don't necessarily think you need to be a research astronomer in order to have a wide body of knowledge of astronomy. There's a huge network of amateur astronomers that are doing really amazing outreach work and public engagement work, and who aren't research astronomers, and who do have this ability to establish credibility. So I think you would do it much the same way, you know, displaying your knowledge and your command of the topic. But you would do it honestly, right? You know, you don't approach it saying, I am an expert in the field because of this. You could say something like, I have studied this a lot, you know, since I was a little kid, so I know a lot about it, or something like that. It doesn't necessarily have to come from, you know, a decade of sitting behind a desk, punching away numbers at a computer.
Yeah, I agree with that, Kelly. I think you hit it right on the head when you mentioned the amateur astronomers as one example, but there are many other examples also in the Science Museum and well, throughout society. Very good examples that we have seen that they're excellent at communicating the science. But as you say, you need to make sure that they sort of don't pretend to be the researchers themselves, but frame it in such a wording that's as to where they got their information from. Sometimes I also say, you know, when somebody asks me to give a talk, I say, well, it's much better if this and that person gives that talk, because, you know, they relate much better with this particular group of people. That, for example, young school children, sometimes it's somebody else that communicates much better with them than I can do. But then, you know, there is some of these events where they want the big professor to come and talk with them, and that's just an aspect. And sometimes you have to respect that, even though you know that you're not the best speaker for that particular audience. So I think we need both, and I think it's wonderful to see how many people do an excellent job. And thanks also to the very good material that's out there in outreach.
Yeah, I would add that if it's excuse me. Yeah, I would add that if it's possible, if I can take attach with an institution or researchers to do their activities. In my case, my association is in touch with many researchers, but not only based in France. So for example, we had the help from the Lunar Planetary Institute, so a US institution, to help us in making some materials to teach to people about how the moon was formed. So I would say that they should look on internet from some recognized institutions. And fortunately, I would speak for the US. They have many like outreach employees within their institute. So yeah.
Thank you very much. And we probably only got space for one last question, and then I'll do a quick goodbye to everybody. And this question is from the NOC República Dominicana. What do you recommend to improve the quality of science articles or approaches to science in non-academic publications? For example, newspapers, news portals, pop news. Has anyone got any ideas on that? I'd probably say maybe to think specifically about astronomy, but I think all science could probably be applicable. Yeah, John?
From my perspective, if I'm talking about trustworthiness, I think it's, so don't just think, I mean, fundamentally I think it's, so what is your goal in writing the article? So that there's some point, something you want. But then if you're thinking about the trust, building trust as one of your goals, behavioral trust, then you have to think about, well, if I want people to perceive me in a certain way, is there content in the article or around the article that helps communicate those perceptions? Are you talking in your article? Are you devoting 30 words, 40 words to talking about why you did the study? Are you giving 50 words to all the work you did to make sure that the study, had integrity? It's not just about, here's what I found. It's about, here's why we did it. Here's how we made sure that when we did it, we were awesome. Here's the voices we listened to when we were thinking about this research and planning this research. And here's who the people we're going to want to talk about this with more. You can make choices to include that information in your article.
Thank you. Thank you very much, John. And thank you to all our speakers. And so we have arrived at the end of this amazing seminar, and it has been so insightful. I've seen people mentioning how they've been taking notes and finding it hard to write down everything. And I sympathize with you on that, especially when I was trying to write down the countries that everyone was from. It's been just absolutely amazing to be able to moderate this session. And I hope that everyone can be able to follow some of the information that you found here further. And don't forget to download the materials if you have not already. And just to note for myself is that I love that we're still having these conversations about getting astronomy out to the public. And even like I studied, one of the degrees I studied was science and science fiction. And I learned about a book called The Man in the Moon by Bishop Francis Godwin from the 1600s. And back then he was trying to communicate the idea and the ideas from astronomy to a public audience, trying to take these things that scientists are doing and present it to the public. And I think 400 years on, this is still something that's going on, and it's getting stronger and more developed. And I'd love to see what the future has to hold for astronomy and public engagement for astronomy as well. We hope you found this to be of real value, this whole talk, for your current and future thoughts and activities within public engagement with astronomy. If you want to learn more about the speakers, I'm pretty sure they won't mind you reaching out to them. You can find their names again on the website, and they're all doing some amazing work. So I think please do just reach out to them and see what else you can find out. I'd like to reiterate a massive thank you to all of our speakers. That's Brooke Smith, who sadly couldn't be with us because it was 3 a.m. in the morning for her. Ewine van Dishoeck, Fatoumata Kébé, Maria Drostovska, John Besley, and of course, Clearly Blumenthal. So also we'd like to send a big thank you to the IAU and Cavali for their support, and also Leiden University for supporting this fantastic project. So we hope these resources can prove valuable to your future projects. I've been Jon Chase. Big thank you to everyone who has attended, and we can't thank you enough, and we hope to see you again at anything else that we do. So love you all. Thank you very much, and hope to see you again.